Hey, NecroVMX here, and welcome to episode 6 of season 1 of the VMX show. It's a day late, but yesterday was Zombie Jesus Day or whatever the hell, and was busy with family obligations, of course, and Saturday was also a really busy day for me because, as I mentioned on the YouTube channel, my sister's getting married next week, and we had the rehearsal on Saturday. So, it's been a busy weekend for me, so I decided to just do it today. So, let's, without any further ado, that was Castlevania, by the way. That was Castlevania Bloodlines. Actually, no, actually, it wasn't. The song was originally in Castlevania Bloodlines. This was the version that came from Castlevania Circle of the Moon on Game Boy Advance. A little bit of sound quality. Who would have thought the handheld would have better sound quality? But then again, it is years and years later, and we're talking, of course, about 32-bit cartridges. Little teeny tiny cartridges as compared to those huge Genesis ones. So there you have it. Originally from Bloodlines. I think it's also been in a couple of other games. I think it might have been in Curse of Darkness. There you have it. That's a song from Castlevania called The Sinking Old Sanctuary. So let's get to your questions and comments from last week. Let's see what we got here. Okay, Armageddon Time. You remember Armageddon Time joined me on the show yesterday. He's the sight-impaired gamer that was last week's guest. We're not having a guest this week. I've been lamenting the fact that I haven't had time to do anything, really, except for the guests and then answer the questions, and I haven't had time to talk about stuff, so decided to just do an episode just by myself for once. So Armageddon Time, reacting to the finished product of last week's episode. He says, nicely done. Hey man, just listen to the podcast. Gotta say, nice going with fixing the weird feedback issue on our conversation. There were a few hiccups, but no biggie. Yes, for some reason, when we did the test the day before, everything sounded fine, but then when we actually recorded his half-hour segment, what happened? I had horrible feedback. I had to do a couple of audio editing tricks to get rid of that. Nice touch using the birds, such a peaceful song. You're having trouble making my voice sound better, though. I'm curious how you completely cleaned it up. Well, like I said, I got some tricks there. I used the birds. He didn't realize why I used that song, Turn, 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 by the Birds, because while we were talking, he said that some people call him A Time, so I thought, like, a time for this, a time for that, so I thought that would be cute. He didn't even pick up on that until I told him. Also enjoyed the VMX mailbag. Fun to hear what people would want to ask you. Lastly, a question for your next podcast. When I was talking about Final Fantasy VI with you, I mentioned how it's my favorite because it's the first actual RPG I got into. Nowadays, it's my favorite because it has classic RPG gameplay, maybe my favorite soundtrack to any game I've heard, and an immensely epic story spanning many in-depth characters. For me, I hold gameplay as my number one reason for enjoying a game, with music as number 2 and story as number 3. Graphics aren't a concern for me, though the nicer the better. Of course, you can't see them all that well, so, My question is, what do you look for in a game to grab your attention? What aspect of a game holds the highest regard for your actual enjoyment? Hopefully you can boil that long paragraph into a simple question. No? Anyway, thanks for having me on again, and I'd love to do it again sometime in the future. Maybe next time I won't be hacking up everywhere. See ya. Gameplay is definitely number one. Graphics, well, I've talked about this in the past. I've talked about it on the channel. I've talked about it on the show. When I praise a game's graphics, I'm not praising the technical quality of them at all. Not by a long shot. I'm praising the artistic quality, so I think that is important. It has to get my attention. It has to be attractive. Music is not always as important, but it does help in creating atmosphere. I think it's more important in some genres than other genres. Like, really, for an action game or an RPG, I think you need good music. For something like a fighting game, I don't necessarily think you really need, amazing music. Although some fighting games have had amazing music. But, look at games like the Mortal Kombat series. You probably couldn't even hum a tune from Mortal Kombat. Because it's always like, bum, 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 bum. It's really, really low-key and ambient and everything. So there you have it. That's from Armageddon Time. Definitely gameplay is the most important thing that I look at when I'm playing a game. Kakeo Silverton he asked me this question. He had asked me a question last week about the summons in Final Fantasy XIII. Here's his follow-up question. Do you like the look of Bahamut? Is it an improvement upon previous installments. Actually, when I got your question, I hadn't yet gotten to that part of the game where I had Bahamut, but I just got him the other day, and I gotta say, I like it, though I wouldn't necessarily call it Bahamut. It looks like they just took a really cool design and called it that. Doesn't necessarily look like a dragon to me, but that's just my opinion anyway. I don't know. Mega Zero had a comment about what I was talking about, Perfect Dark Zero. He said, it isn't all that bad. It depends on what you like. I enjoyed it for a while when I got my first 360 a month after it came out, but I had that and some Xbox Live Arcade games, so I thought it was good for my first 360 game. Well, it seems to me that most of the people who kind of liked it had not played the original Perfect Dark, so they really had no expectations when it came to Perfect Dark Zero. So I think we all had very high expectations because the Nintendo 64 game was so amazing, and then that was such of a letdown. I don't know. There's also a lot of better shooters on the Xbox 360 anyway. I know I'm not talking about Halo, by the way. But I don't know. I couldn't really recommend it. I haven't played it, but everything I've heard has told me that it's a letdown. AzurMage253 commented on my RSS descriptions. Maybe I should be more creative instead of just saying, fifth episode of VMX show, sixth episode of VMX show. Actually, I agree with you. Starting with this episode, I'm going to do exactly that. So there you have it. Let's see, what else do we got for questions? Here's one from JMeister25. I listened to your show and my brother got the Red Ring of Death last week, but I do hope that the Slim will not overheat, just like the 360 regularly does. Of course, he's talking about the rumored Xbox 360 Slim model, which of course has not yet been confirmed as something that is real, but it is something that is heavily rumored to exist right now. Of course, that's what they said about the Wii HD in the past, so you never know. My question regards Dream Theater, of course, my favorite band, and I think a lot of people are going to be asking music-related questions since I posted that music folder 4-part video. What are your hopes for the next album, or do you think it will be a double CD since there hasn't been one since 2002? What do you think the new concept will be, or will they just do a non-conceptual thing like Systematic Chaos? Also, what is your opinion on Black Clouds? Do you think it was good or nothing new? A lot of questions there. I have no thoughts on the next album because Dream Theater they always come sort of out of left field and do their own thing, and you can never really predict what they're going to do. I did, predict that they were going to start getting heavier, and they have gotten heavier. But with the more recent album, you still had a song like The Best of Times, which was kind of a throwback to the old Images and Words sound, which at first I didn't appreciate because I much prefer them heavier. I much prefer their newer material over the older material. But when you listen to the lyrics and the sentiment of the song and how it's about remembering the past, it kind of made sense for it to sound like a throwback. I don't think they'll do a double CD unless it's something that warrants a double CD. When you said, it hasn't been done since 2002, of course he's talking about the album 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, which needed to be a double CD. Originally it wasn't planned as that because they were going to do, 5 songs and then the 20-minute epic, and the 20-minute song wound up being a 42-minute song, so they needed that extra disc. So I don't think they're setting out necessarily to do that. I couldn't say what I think the new concept will be or whatever. I don't think they're going to do like another concept album. They've only ever done one concept album, and I don't see them doing any more unless they feel the need to. My opinion on Black Clouds and Silver Linings is it was a great album. It was not their best album by any stretch of the imagination, but it was nowhere near the worst. I put it actually kind of right in the middle. Is if you think about it, they have like 10 albums now. Off the top of my head. For some reason I'm blanking on it, which is strange for me. But I would say I put it fourth because there's 3 albums I like better than that, and that's Systematic Chaos, Scenes from a Memory, and Train of Thought. Not necessarily in that order, but those are my 3 favorites, and then after that, Black Clouds. Let's move on for anybody who's bored hearing me talk about Dream Theater. Here's a comment, not a question, but a comment from 13 Duct Tape Ninja 13. For some reason, aren't you the person that, that name is very familiar to me. Aren't you? Didn't I make a rant about you or something? I think I did. I think this guy really got me really, really angry at one point. And oh yeah, that was the whole. Was it the anime thing? I don't remember. I really don't. It was something with duct tape. Somebody like really, really angered me, and I made this whole blade about it. But then it turned out, afterwards, it wasn't that big of a deal at all. But I think that might be the guy. Well, good to have you asking leaving a comment anyway. Remember that I mentioned the Nintendo GameCube kiosks in McDonald's. His town has one with a Nintendo 64 kiosk still there. I've never even seen. Actually, I might have seen Nintendo 64 kiosks in a McDonald's. Not recently, of course. That's interesting. That really is interesting. I enjoy sleeping, Left This. I'm pretty sure it's late to get this in the episode 6. Nah, you could put it the day before. I don't care. What is the hardest cancel segment of a Mega Man game you've gone through, X series included? That's easy. Mega Man X5, which, originally Mega Man X5 was going to be the last Mega Man X game, and because they were planning it as being the last one, there was a lot of nostalgia stuff and throwback stuff, musical cues, graphical cues, sections of levels and such that were not only from the old X games, but from the original Mega Man games as well. There was a section that was sort of a tribute to Quickman's stage from Mega Man 2, which of course has those vertical lines that you have to avoid. And it's a whole lot harder in Mega Man X5, even though you do have a time stopper style weapon in that, like you do in Mega Man 2 to stop them. But generally speaking, it's harder simply because you can't hug the walls. In Mega Man, you could hug the walls to try and get away from it, as far away from the beams as possible. But if you're doing that with X or with Zero, they tend to stick to the walls. They tend to slide down them slowly. Or if you're wearing like the Shadow or Ninja type armor, you could actually just stick right there, and that can completely screw you up. So, in Mega Man 2, I mean, some people say, "Oh my God, it's impossible to get through that without using the time stopper thing." No problem for me. I get through it all the time. But Mega Man X5, I pretty much have to. That is difficult. It's like almost on the level of something you would see in like I Want to Be the Guy type of thing. I'm not saying it's as hard as that, but it's very, very, very hard. Okay, here's one from Simon McAuliffe. He actually looks like 2 questions here. Hey, NecroVMX, I'm loving your podcast. It's very informative and funny. Can't wait for the 6th episode. Well, I hope you're enjoying the 6th episode so far. I used to be a subscriber to your channel, but I deleted my account. My account name was The Revival Kid. Why did you delete your account? I don't really understand why people do that. I will be creating an account is what you should have said, when I have the time, and will subscribe to you again. Well, it's good to hear that. Now to the questions. Question number 1. I have never played a Japanese RPG before and really want to get into Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest series. What game is a great game for starter? I, of course, played other RPGs like Oblivion, Fallout, Fable, and Zelda. Well, I mean, you could look at my top 10 RPGs feature where I talked about my 10 favorites. And of course, they put Dragon Quest VIII for PlayStation 2 as the number 1 RPG of all time. I would definitely look at those because each of them is sort of representing a great one to start out with. I mean, if you're going to start with Final Fantasy, you might want to start with like 10 or 12, It's kind of hard to say for somebody who's into the Western style of RPGs like Oblivion and Fallout and Fable. Zelda's kind of a weird one, but if you're into Zelda, you might want to look into games that are similar to that, like a Kingdom Hearts or whatever. But I would say, yeah, try out Dragon Quest VIII for PlayStation 2. I mean, it's cheap enough to get it these days, and I'd like to think that you'd like it because it's my favorite RPG. But let me know. Let me know what happens with that. Question 2, I know you're a big fan of metal, but are you at all a fan of it? Oh, this is interesting. How I did want to talk about this. Are you at least at all a fan of the subgenre post-metal? I like post-metal, but lean more towards post-rock, experimental, and progressive rock. My favorite bands are Mars Volta, Mogwai, Explosions in the Sky, and God is an Astronaut. Name me some of your favorite post-metal, or if you don't have any, name me some progressive metal bands. Well, it's interesting because none of those bands that you mentioned are post-metal. Now, you did say that you lean more towards post-rock, and that's definitely what Mogwai, Explosions in the Sky, and God as an Astronaut are. Mars Volta, that's definitely prog. I hate Mars Volta, though. I just want to, destroy them with my balls. I don't know what it is, but I rage out. They give me such a headache. But I do like some post metal. My favorite bands from post metal are Callisto, Pelican, and the Red Sparrows. Those three are probably my favorite. I also would put Cult of Luna in there as well. They're pretty good. I don't know if they're like a huge favorite, but they're pretty good. As for progressive, I mean, well, Dream Theater and Rush and Ayreon and Opeth and all those types of bands. But I did want to mention that because I thought it was funny that you say, "Hey, post metal, yeah, post metal's great," and then a bunch of post rock bands. So I don't know if you were using those as an example because you said you leaned more towards post rock, or if you thought they were post metal. But if you're into post metal and you haven't already, definitely check out the Red Sparrows, Pelican, and A Cult of Luna, and of course, what was the other one I mentioned? Callisto. They're probably my favorite, which is weird that I forgot the name out there. But Callisto are absolutely amazing, and the latest album, in particular, very very good. They got a new vocalist, and that really changed things up. Here's a question from FoxFang96 is back. And he says, "Hey, this one is for your show. Out of all the game series you've played, for example, Mario, Zelda, Final Fantasy, etc., which game series do you hate the most?" By the way, sorry about the Sonic 4 question. Didn't realize you answered. Yeah, he submitted something about Sonic 4. Um, oh God, I mean, it's easy to say Metal Gear, but I'm trying to think, is there anything that I just have more disdain for? I can't stand the Tomb Raider games. I think that's ridiculous. That should have ended a long time ago. Obviously, Metal Gear, I find them to be boring and highly pretentious. Um, hmm. There's probably some others. There are some games that I just don't get the whole appeal of, but not necessarily entire series. Metal Gear definitely is the one that pops into my head as soon as you say that. So that's what I'll go with. I'll go with Metal Gear. Got one more question. Actually, no, I don't have one more question. I'm sorry, that was the last one. So I got something I want to talk about that's kind of interesting, and I got some news to go through and everything. But first, let's play a little music. What am I gonna play? Oh, I know. How about I'm in a Zelda sort of mood. How about some Zelda? Here's some Zelda from Ocarina of Time. you know what I love about myself, and I hate to sit here tooting my own horn, but I'm probably one of the only motherfuckers who sit there and do a podcast like this and say, hey, let's play a song from Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and I pick Spirit Temple. Everybody will, let's play Gerudo Valley, like you haven't heard that 4 million times. Anyway, let's see what's in the news this week. Got a little bit of news about Super Street Fighter 4, which is coming out very, very soon. This is interesting. Walmart stores this week began offering $10 gift cards with the purchase of Capcom's Super Street Fighter 4 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And the new offer, customers who pre-order the Super Street Fighter 4 game will get the gift card. Now, I didn't even know that Walmart offered pre-orders on games. If you're interested in getting the game and you got a Walmart near you, you might actually want to consider going to Walmart and pre-ordering it, getting a $10 gift card, and then I don't know if you could use that on the game. Speaking of the game, the price is looks like the price is going to be $36.99, which is an amazing price for a new game. Also, Amazon.com is also offering a pre-order bonus for Super Street Fighter 4, the Super Classic Costume Pack, which I haven't necessarily seen it yet, so I don't know what it's going to be like, but I don't know if it's going to be something that is already unlockable or something that you can buy on the Xbox Live Arcade Store or the PlayStation Network. But, there you have it. Speaking of fighting games, Samurai Shodown Sen just hit Xbox 360 and probably PlayStation 3 as well. Actually going to pass on that one. It's in 3D, and they've done plenty of those games. I'm waiting for the next Samurai Shodown in 2D. That's what I want to see. More Super Street Fighter 4 news. The game is going to come to arcades. Capcom has been kind of about it. Yeah, maybe it'll come for arcades. We're not sure. Officially, yes, it is coming to arcade, so that'll be, for the people in the tournament circuit, that's going to be great news. Oh, actually, I have another pre-order news, well, not necessarily pre-order news, but Super Street Fighter 4, the Fight Stick at Buy.com, they've discounted it to $34.99, so, if you're looking to get a new Fight Stick for Super Street Fighter 4, now's the time to get it. Super cheap, super cheap. Here's an interesting one. Microsoft is suing a company that I've never heard of called Datel for patent infringement on, I see 6 different patents on their Wildfire controller, which is such an obvious ripoff of course, the Xbox 360 controller. It probably is an Xbox 360 controller, but it looks like they copied the design a little bit too closely. It's almost exactly the same thing. Kind of pathetic. Usually, I've seen controller designs that were huge ripoffs. Of course, there was the Nuon controller. For those of you who don't remember the Nuon, well, if you remember back in the 90s, back when we were all playing Nintendo 64 and PlayStation and Saturn for some of us, they were talking about, of course, everybody was talking about the new systems that were coming out. We knew the name Dreamcast, but we didn't know the awesomeness in store for us. And people, of course, are already starting to talk about this fabled thing called PlayStation 2. But one of the systems that seems like it just was hinted at and then disappeared was something called Project X, and they had this graphic of a huge solid letter X, and crushed underneath it was what looked like Mario's hat. So it's like, yeah, we're going to come in and we're going to crush Nintendo with our awesome X. And if you think back, it's actually easy to assume that Project X might have become the Xbox, but that's actually not the case at all. Project X actually got a way more ridiculous name, the Nuon, and it was more of kind of a DVD player that sort of played games. There were less than 10 games released for the whole system. Probably the only notable thing about it was that the controller, which was made by Interact, was an obvious Nintendo 64 ripoff. And I'm surprised that Nintendo didn't have a thing or two to say about that. Microsoft, maybe they're just way more litigious about their controller designs than Nintendo is. But I don't know. kind of interesting. Here's an interesting bit of news. Sega Studio San Francisco has closed their doors. So for those of you, I don't know, who were looking forward to the next game from Sega Studio San Francisco, well, they're not doing it. Sega of America has announced that they're done with that particular studio. From what I understand, it looks like they were working on Iron Man 2. They're still going to release it. That's coming out May 4th. High Voltage Software is going to be developing the Wii version. But that will probably be the last game that you'll see out from Sega Studios San Francisco. Of course, when it all has a Sega logo on it, it doesn't matter which city it came out of. You just know that it's Sega. PlayStation 3, this has been a topic of much debate on the show. PlayStation 3 has been enjoying some newfound success lately, and for the first time in a long time, they're actually starting to top the hardware and software charts. Of course, when a popular game comes out that's a PS3 exclusive, they tend to top the charts. Of course, I'm talking about in Japan, not in America. The hardware, looks like they moved about 50,000 units of PlayStation 3s this past week, as opposed to nearly 37,000 for the Wii. PSP still going strong at number 2. The PSP has actually been outselling the Wii in Japan and Europe for a long time. People, of course, don't talk about that. Of course, if you were to really look at what the real number one system is, if you were to add up the sales figures for the DSi-LL, the DSi, and the DS Lite, that's probably number one. And Xbox 360 after that, then the PSP Go, and the PlayStation 2 last. Of course, the Xbox 360 enjoying much more success here in America, still successful in Japan, not nearly as much so. But looking at the biggest sellers for games, you have Fist of the North Star Musou for PlayStation 3, topping the charts at 385,000 units. Then Yakuza 4, also for PlayStation 3, at 467,000 units. Then after that we got a lot of typical Nintendo stuff. Pokemon Ranger Path of Life, New Super Mario Bros. Wii still kicking in there. Friend Collection for the DS. Then there's God of War 3, another PlayStation 3 game. Then there's the Xbox 360 version of Fist of the North Star Musou. And if you were to look at the American versions, I'm sure that an Xbox game would be selling more. Of course, I don't think we're going to get Fist of the North Star. But for something like Final Fantasy 13, you would see the difference. Gundam Assault Survive for the PSP is after that. Then Wii Fit Plus still in there. And at number 10, Saki Portable for the PSP. So it looks like, the PlayStation 3 doing very well. The Wii and the DS, of course, doing well as always. And, of course, the PSP hanging in there. Xbox 360, only one game on there. Remember, in Japan, they tend to like things that are made in Japan. Speaking of PlayStation, here's a great one for PlayStation Network, meaning you'll be able to download this for both your PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Portable. Final Fantasy IX is going to be released as a PlayStation Network game, and that is really cool. It's probably my favorite one of the my favorite one of the PlayStation ones. So not bad, huh? That's pretty cool. Speaking of downloads, here's the latest stuff to hit Nintendo downloads. For WiiWare, there's 2 new games coming out. One's called Fishy Fishy. I just love the description. Welcome to Fishy Fishy, a game that can be played with just one button. Yeah, next. Then we have Learning with the Puyus Episode 2, which is some sort of children trainer thing, so next. Over on the Virtual Console, Ironclad for Neo Geo hit the Virtual Console. It's a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. That's pretty cool, though. That's 1,000 Wii points. Those 2 ridiculous WiiWare games I mentioned are 500 Wii points. DSiWare is getting a bunch of Game & Watch games. Manhole, Helmet, and Vermin are there. And Mr. Driller Drill to You Drop has hit DSiWare. And that's probably the biggest news of this week in terms of Nintendo downloads. Speaking of Nintendo, Sega's big shooter The Conduit is getting a sequel. There's some screenshots available on the internet. Looks good. Looks like some classic 4-player split-screen action. And that's something that I've always said recently that has been lost, is the classic feeling of playing a game in the room with your friends that are in the same room, not playing it with some 13-year-old kid in California who's calling you a faggot. Because who needs to deal with that shit? Sometimes I hear that stuff and I just think kids should be, strangled or something. No, I don't really think that, but I do think that at this point you gotta punish the parents for fucking up so bad. Actually, yesterday I mentioned this. I mentioned this twice, actually. Well, in one of my videos, I forget which one it was. Oh, it was the Final Fantasy 13 level up video that I recently put up. I mentioned that I was having a technical issue, which is resolved now, by the way. That's why you haven't seen any commentary videos. You're not going to see commentary videos today because I'm busy doing the VMX show, so we'll be picking that up tomorrow. But I also, of course, went into more detail in the GameCube collection update about how we had some kids over at the house that were going around playing, with stuff, and a lot of stuff got broken. One of the things was a Guitar Hero World Tour disc that got a circular scratch on it, and the other was a USB port on my computer that got broken. And I got a USB hub to cover that, and the fine folks over at Play and Trade in Port Jervis were able to fix my disc for only $3. They also fixed the DVD that I had laying around that had come to me scratched, so that was very helpful. But my friend Joey said when I was explaining what happened to him, and he was just horrified, of course, that he said, at this point you gotta punish the parents for fucking up so bad. I don't know. Let me tell you something. If I ever have kids, and I think I will, they will be taught to respect other people's property. Because if my kid went to somebody's house and fucked up their Xbox games and their computer and everything, all I gotta say is I would see that as being my fault. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, all right, let's get to the lighter side. Let's talk about something fun. Let's talk about something retro. Here's something that I kind of came up with the idea in my head that it might be a video, but I've decided that it's more suited to the VMX show. Which is great, because sometimes I do videos of things like rants or whatever that I don't necessarily lend themselves to YouTube. So here's one that I think lends itself more to the VMX show. Another reason I'm glad that I started this whole thing. I wanted to talk about how some games, and this is something that mostly has affected classic games, and I'm going to give two examples that I can think of off the top of my head, and the thoughts revolved around that. And I want you guys to maybe comment with some examples of your own. But games that they have three different names. A name for the Japanese release, then they call it something else for the American release, and then there's something completely different for the European release. And sometimes this causes some pretty funny problems, and I just wanted to go over this because I thought it was amusing when I thought of this. One of the examples has to do with Final Fantasy, and the other example has to do with Castlevania. I'll talk about Castlevania first because Castlevania comes first in all things. It will always come first in every way. But it's my favorite series by far. Of course, you guys, if you've been following the channel, you know I'm a huge Castlevania fan, and you might have seen the various features I've done. I did playthroughs of Simon's Quest. I did a playthrough of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I did a feature that was all about the history of Castlevania. I did a little mini thing about the history of the names of the bosses of Symphony of the Night. And I did a feature where I played every single Castlevania game, and I got more features planned. Of course, there's a Castlevania Judgment feature actually on the horizon that's already been announced. And I got more playthroughs, more things coming up. So you guys know, if you've watched the history of Castlevania thing, or if you're just familiar with the series yourself, you know that in Japan they don't refer to it as Castlevania. They of course call it Akumajo Dracula, which means Devil's Castle Dracula. Now, what's interesting is that all the versions of Castlevania that are about Simon Belmont's first battle with Dracula are called Devil's Castle Dracula over there. Mostly they're completely different games. Sometimes the gameplay styles are very different from each other. The graphics are different, the sound is different, the levels are different, but they're still called the same thing, Devil's Castle Dracula. So there's a Devil's Castle Dracula on the Famicom, which we know as Castlevania. There's one on the MSX2, There's one in arcades, which we know as Haunted Castle. There's one for the Super NES, or Super Famicom rather, over there, which we know of as Super Castlevania 4. There's one on the PlayStation, which is Castlevania Chronicles over here, and there's one on the X68000. And there's probably some more, but I think that's it actually. But those are all pretty much the same event, so they're all just called Devil's Castle Dracula over there. One thing that's interesting, though, is, of course, when they're released here, they're given different titles, because they think, well, that would just confuse people. I don't know why they don't think that there. Why is it confusing to people in America, and why is it confusing to people in Europe, but it's not confusing to people in Japan? Do they just not care, or do they think that they're so superior that they'll pick up on everything? I think that's what it is, to be honest. I think that they think they're superior. I mean, just look at the story behind Super Mario Bros. 2, which I might touch on in a bit if I have time, and I think I will. But, yeah, okay, so oftentimes, the first one, the NES one, okay, in America we're going to call it Castlevania, and that's fine. And in Europe they also called it Castlevania. Then there was the MSX2 version. Now, we didn't get that, because the MSX2 never came to America at all, so it would kind of be impossible to localize the games. But the MSX2 actually was released in Europe, and they did get that game, and for some reason they said, well, we can't call it Castlevania because there's already a Castlevania. Now, that's pretty rich, because eventually there would be more than one game that was just called Castlevania. In America, we got two of them. We got one on the NES, and we got one on the Nintendo 64. In Europe, they got three, because Lament of Innocence is just called Castlevania over there. So, there's all sorts of confusion over there already. But anyway, they said, let's call it Vampire Killer. Well, alright. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. But then along comes, the 16-bit era, and what happens? They said, well, we already released one for the Super NES, and we want to release another 16-bit game. But we don't want to deal with Nintendo censorship. We want to do a bloodier, gorier game. So let's release it on Sega, because they don't censor as much. So, alright. That's a whole nother rant about them switching systems like that. And I already did that on YouTube. So I'm not going to get into that too much. But what do they call it? Vampire Killer. Okay, so, Now, here in America, no big deal. They're going to call it Castlevania. So they wind up calling it Castlevania Bloodlines. But then are they going to release it in Europe as Vampire Killer? I say, why not? I mean, they already released all this other stuff, that has the same name. But then again, alright, by now everybody in Japan knows, everybody in Europe, rather, knows the series as Castlevania. But here's the thing. They purposely released it on the Sega Genesis, or what they call in Japan and Europe the Mega Drive, because they wanted to avoid censorship and do a bloodier game. But in Europe, you can't have blood at all. They're very, very strict about violence in games, and also you can't even call it Bloodlines, because you can't have blood in the title. So they wound up toning it down, basically making a version that could have easily been released for Super NES, and I don't know why it wasn't, and calling it Castlevania The New Generation. So, yeah, so when you say Vampire Killer, which do you mean? Do you mean Vampire Killer, the European version of Devil's Castle Dracula for the MSX? Or do you mean Vampire Killer, the Japanese version of Castlevania Bloodlines for Sega Genesis? Kind of funny, I don't know, I just wanted to talk about that. Another one is in Final Fantasy. Now this one really cracks me up, because it goes, there's not just confusion between Europe and Japan, but America gets in on the act too in this one, so this is pretty funny. Along in the 16-bit era of Final Fantasy, of course we know that they had released Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 on the Super NES. They also released another game, a game that a lot of people I think would like to forget. And I'm of course talking about Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Now, a lot of people are mistaken about this game. There's a lot of misconceptions about Final Fantasy games, and this is one of the biggest ones. I mean, actually the biggest one is that Final Fantasy VII, that there's videos of it running on Nintendo 64. That's not even true. And one day I'm going to talk about that and what the real, true origin of 7 is. But, and it'll blow your mind, too. But anyway, Mystic Quest is interesting because a lot of people like to assume that the game was made in America. I guess they're lumping it in with the likes of Secret of Evermore, which was made by Square's American counterpart, and was also crappy. Well, it wasn't. It was actually made in Japan, but it was specifically designed for American gamers. And it's supposed to be an entry-level RPG. You know, it has the auto mode, it's very linear, there's no random battles, and there's no fun. So the idea is, you know, get people who've never played RPGs into RPGs. But I don't know. I personally think that if you get someone who's never played an RPG before, and you hand them Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, you know, they're gonna say, what the fuck? What the fuck is this shit? But anyway, before I get to that, I want to talk about a game called Holy Sword Legend, and trust me, this is related. This cracks me up. I mean, Holy Sword Legend, it was going to be on the Famicom Disk System, didn't work out, so they made Final Fantasy instead. We all know the story by now, or if you don't, that's another thing I'll be getting into one day. What happened, though? They eventually came back and they released Holy Sword Legend for Game Boy. Now, when they released it in America, they gave it the name Final Fantasy Adventure to connect it to the Final Fantasy series, so that people would buy it, because I played Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy Legend, I'll play this one too. And especially since it does actually have a lot of references to Final Fantasy games, such as Chocobos and Moogles and such, because the game has a strong connection to the series, in the sense that the original version of Holy Sword Legend, the Famicom Disk System one, is the reason that Final Fantasy exists to begin with. But anyway, back to Final Fantasy Adventure for a second. Then they released it in Europe, and they said, well, let's call it Mystic Quest. Now you already see where this is going, right? Then comes a game called Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Now this cracks me up, because they released it. They released it specifically for Americans, even though it was made in Japan. And in Japan, it's called Final Fantasy USA Mystic Quest. All right, fair enough. I don't like that you put Final Fantasy USA on that, like this is what we're into, because it's not. But then the funniest part is they released it in Japan. They dropped the name Final Fantasy from it completely and just call it Mystic Quest Legend in an attempt to connect it to Mystic Quest, which is Holy Sword Legend. So Holy Sword Legend, when they released it in America, they're trying to, let's connect this to Final Fantasy. And Mystic Quest, when they released it in Europe, they're like, let's connect it to Holy Sword Legend. So very, very bizarre there. If anybody has any other examples similar to these, do leave me a comment, talk about it. I'll talk about it on the show. I want to talk about Super Mario Bros. 2 briefly, because I did mention that. Of course, we all know what happened with Super Mario Bros. 2. Super Mario Bros. Was a huge success, so they released 2. It was harder because they figured everybody's beaten Mario by now. And then somebody said that us big, dumb American, white, round eyes cannot put our stakes and guns down for 2 seconds to bother to master the Mario game, so Mario 2 is way too hard for us. So they take a way more bizarre game, Doki Doki Panic. That's not even the full title. That's like part of the title. The full title's much longer. But this really bizarre game, and they just, changed a little bit of the gameplay, took out some of the sprites, put in Mario characters, and then said, here's Super Mario Bros. 2. And that's why 2 is different from 1. We all know that. What a lot of people don't know is that they actually released that game in Japan as Super Mario USA. That cracks me up, and I'm going to tell you why. For one, we all thought of it, the whole Super Mario Bros. 2 debacle, as being as an insult to American gamers, saying we're not hardcore enough to deal with the real Mario 2. We'll only get it, years later as the lost levels. We suck at Mario. We can't play it. And then it's an insult to Japanese gamers because it's saying, ha ha ha, you stupid assholes will buy the same game twice. You already have Doki Doki Panic, now here's Super Mario USA. Which is the same fucking game. Or maybe I got it all wrong. Maybe nobody bought Doki Doki Panic. Maybe it was a huge failure and that's why they had to turn it into Mario for people to buy it. Which I guess says, hey, you guys don't like good gameplay, you only like Mario, so Well, just take some game that's good, but you didn't buy because you didn't like the characters, and put Mario in it. I mean, imagine if that was done today. Like if they took something like Eco and replaced him with Link. Just so that it would sell more. I mean, I call that being a whore, to be honest with you. Being a massive, massive whore bag. How to say it, because it's so true. Uh, Now that I've talked about, whore bags and Japanese people insulting us and insulting themselves and whatnot, let's play some more music, huh? I haven't been playing as much music on the show because I've been rushing through everything, but here's another song. Let's see. This one's really fun, and I'm not going to tell you what it is until the end. So try and guess it. Of course, if you didn't know what that was, I might have had to come to your house and slap you silly. That's from Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers. That's Cammy's theme. I was originally going to play the one, I was thinking maybe I'll play the one from Street Fighter 4, but then I said, nah, kid, nah, son, let's go old school, kid, yeah, oh, yeah, kid. Um, so I said, why not? I'll go old school. That's actually the Super NES version, not the arcade version, because, well, that's what I had. So there you have it. Cammy's theme from Super Street Fighter 2. I'm not out of time, but I'm about out of steam here, but I do want to go over one or two things with you before I wrap the show up. Wrapping it up a little early, but, I don't feel the need to stretch it out to an hour just so it is an hour. You got to end it when it's time to end it. Plus, I'm tired. Let's see. There will be no show next week. Episode 7, which is the next episode, will be in 2 weeks. So it'll be the weekend. That's like the 17th, 18th. Of course, I've mentioned it a million times, but in case you've conveniently forgotten yet again, it's my sister's wedding next weekend, so I will not be doing an episode of the VMX show. You'll likely not get any videos. You'll get videos afterwards, of course. You might actually get videos of the wedding, but you will not get regular videos that weekend or a VMX show, so keep that in mind. I do want your questions. I do want your comments. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. And I want it now, as Queen would say. Now, definitely leave me your questions and comments, and I'll just answer them in 2 weeks instead of 1 week. Hey, it gives you more time to come up with something good. One more thing that I wanted to mention was about guesting on the show. It seems everybody wants to, but nobody wants to ask me. I haven't gotten a single volunteer to guest for the show, but every single person that I've asked has been very enthusiastic about doing it. Not everybody that I've asked has been able to do it yet. There are some that are going to do it soon, but not just yet. But, don't be afraid to ask me. I mean, if you're somebody that I never talked to before, I'm probably going to want to talk to you for a little bit to see what kind of person you are. But Come on, volunteer. You want to be on the show? I mean, I can't go around asking all the time, hey, you want to be on the show? And they're like, yes, definitely. It's like, volunteer. IM me. Send me a private message, whatever. You need Skype. That's the only requirement. And if you're having a hard time, it's like the easiest thing in the world to use. I'll link you to it. I'll walk you through it. Just as long as you have something that you can talk to me like on Instant Messenger or whatever that I can talk to you directly on, and I'll walk you right through it. Just let me know. So if you want to be on the show, don't wait for me to come to you. I mean, I probably will. I've been asking people like crazy, and everybody's, like I said, been really enthusiastic about it. But don't be afraid to ask me. Not at all. I won't bite. Not that hard. What in the butt? I can't believe I made that reference, but there you go. So that about wraps it up for today. Like I said, I don't want to drag it out to an hour just because the show's an hour. Like I said, I'm tired. It's a day late, so sorry for the short show today, but hope you enjoyed it anyway. We'll see you next week with episode 7. NecroVMX out.